Welcome to Highly Sensitive Healing. I'm Lauren LaSalle, a former therapist, a highly sensitive person, and a mentor for HSPs. For too long, I felt like there was something wrong with me. I felt everything deeply, sounds, emotions, other people's moods, and I learned pretty early on just to push through, to quiet my intuition, and to try to keep up with what everyone else was doing and what society expected of me. But the truth is, my sensitivity was never the problem. I just didn't have the language, support, or tools to understand it. This podcast was created for highly sensitive people who are tired of trying to toughen up or fix themselves and are ready to heal in a way that honors how they're wired. Here, we talk about nervous system regulation, unhelpful thought patterns, emotional overwhelm, and self-trust through a gentle, compassionate lens. You don't need to become someone new to feel better. You don't need to push harder or try more. You get to learn how to care for yourself in ways that actually work for you. If you've ever felt overwhelmed, misunderstood, or like you were carrying too much, this space is for you. My hope is that each episode helps you feel a little less alone and a little more at home in yourself. So, wherever you're listening from, welcome. Take a breath, settle in, and let's begin. Hello, everybody. Today's episode is, I'd say a sneak peek, but it's more than a sneak peek. It is the whole lesson 1 from module 1 of my upcoming At Your Own Pace course called Inner Voice Reset, which is a method for silencing your inner critic and becoming your own biggest cheerleader. And this course is being created due to many of the responses that I had from my feedback survey about what would be helpful for you to get from me. So if you would like to be a part of that survey, I will link it in the episode description. I would love to hear your feedback about what would be helpful for me to create to help support you. What the Inner Voice Reset course is going to do is going to help you silence your inner critic, become your own safe place, stop fighting with yourself every single day, and feel emotionally at home inside your own mind. Because I want you to know that there was never anything wrong with you, even if your inner critic has been telling you that there is. So let's get a handle on that inner critic, reset our inner voice to be a more compassionate voice to help us instead of hurting us and getting in our way. So I really hope you enjoy lesson 1 that I'm sharing with you today. This is on pre-sale. I'm hoping to have the whole course done and ready within the next month and a half at the most. And so this is on pre-sale for $99 right now. The price will be going up $100 to $199 once it is actually, did you hear my rooster in the background? Once it is actually being released, once it is completely done, released, it will be going up to $199. So if you want to get it on pre-sale, get it for $99. Listen to this module 1, lesson 1, see what you think, see if it's helpful. Every lesson also has some action steps, which I put in there so you can really get the most out of this course, because I want everybody to feel so much more confident, safe in yourself, like you are actually rooting for yourself and helping yourself instead of constantly fighting with yourself by the end of this course. So I'm so excited to be creating this. I honestly can't believe that I haven't created this yet, because talking about self-talk and our inner voice has been one of my favorite things to work on with clients as a coach, as a mentor, and also when I was a therapist. I loved working on this stuff with therapy clients too. So I feel like it's finally time to get this out. So without further ado, here is lesson 1 of the Inner Voice Reset. Welcome to module 1 of the Inner Voice Reset. I am so excited that you're here. This is a course that I have heard is very needed from so many HSPs that I've talked to. So here it is. I'm so excited to get into this and really help you change that inner voice and the inner critic that so often throughout the day is just tearing us down, right? I know I know you know what I'm talking about. So, welcome to the beginning of what may become one of the most meaningful conversations that you ever have. And this is not with another person, but with yourself. If you're here, there is a good chance that you have spent years believing that being hard on yourself was just a part of who you are. Maybe you replay conversations long after they've ended, wondering what you should have said differently or thinking about something that you wish you hadn't said. Maybe you constantly feel like you aren't doing enough, even when everyone around you tells you that you're doing great. Or maybe you've been so accustomed to criticizing yourself that you barely notice it's happening anymore. And that's what happens so much of the time, is that it's just automatic. We criticize ourselves and it's just something we're used to. So, if any of that sounds familiar, I want you to know something before we go any further. You are not alone. So many highly sensitive people develop an incredibly active inner voice because you naturally notice details, you care deeply about others, and you process experiences on a profound emotional level. Your mind also becomes incredibly skilled at spotting what it believes are flaws, mistakes, or potential dangers. And over time, that voice can become so constant that it starts to feel like your own identity. But what if it actually isn't? There was a time, a long, long time, when I assumed that my inner dialogue was just my reality, and every mistake felt like proof that I wasn't enough. Every setback became evidence that I should have worked harder or done better, and I thought I was just being honest with myself. And then I caught myself thinking something after making a small mistake, and the words that ran through my mind were so harsh that I paused and asked myself, would I ever say this to someone I truly loved? No, absolutely not. I would never speak to a friend that way. I would never speak to a child that way. I would never speak to someone who was already struggling the way that I spoke to myself. But somehow I'd convinced myself that speaking to myself that way was normal and that that was okay. And realizing this became a turning point. That realization didn't instantly silence my inner critic, but it did help me recognize something important, which is just because a thought appears in my mind does not automatically make it true or even helpful. And that realization opened the door to a completely different relationship with myself. And throughout this module and this course, you will begin making the same discovery. You will learn to recognize the voice that has been quietly influencing your confidence, to understand why it became so powerful, and start observing it instead of automatically believing it. And along the way, we are going to explore something that surprises many people, which is the voice that you currently experience as your harshest critic may not actually be trying to hurt you. And that idea maybe sounds impossible right now and doesn't make sense, but don't worry, we will come back to it in the next lesson where everything will start to make a little more sense. And for now, your job is not to fix yourself or try to do anything, even. Your job is just to simply notice, because awareness is where every lasting transformation begins. So, before we can change the way that you speak to yourself, we first need to discover who is actually doing the talking. And this might sound like a strange thing to say, but it is one of the most important ideas in this whole course. Many people spend years assuming that every thought that appears in their mind reflects who they actually are. They don't question it, they don't examine it, they just believe it. And in today's lesson, I am going to invite you to do something different. Instead of accepting every critical thought about yourself as a fact, you're going to begin observing it with curiosity. And here's something to listen for as we go through this lesson. What if that harsh voice isn't actually you? Don't rush to answer the question, just hold on to it. By the end of today's lesson, you will have a completely different perspective on the conversations happening inside your own mind. And as you move through this lesson, pay close attention to one specific moment. Notice the first time that you realize your inner criticism happens automatically. And that is the moment I want you to catch. And it's not because you're doing anything wrong. You are not doing anything wrong at all. It's because noticing it means that you are no longer completely identified with it. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to recognize the difference between your authentic self and the inner critic that has been narrating your life for far too long. So take your time, be curious, and remember nothing about this lesson or anything that I ever do with anyone requires perfection because perfection is not possible. We just need to be aware right now. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about starting to pay attention to your inner dialogue, we are going to talk about the voice that you have been hearing for years without realizing that it had a name. Most people imagine an inner critic as something that is dramatic or obvious, and they expect it to sound loud, cruel, or relentlessly negative. And sometimes it does sound these ways, right? But more often, though, it's much quieter than that. This voice disguises itself as reason, and it calls itself being realistic. It tells you that it is simply trying to help you avoid disappointment, and that is why it's so easy to mistake this voice for your own inner wisdom. And for most highly sensitive people, the inner critic does not sound like an enemy. It sounds like a concerned advisor who never quite believes that you are ready, capable, or enough. And I think that's a really important distinction to make. So this voice could say things like, you should have done better. Everyone else seems to have this figured out. Don't get your hopes up. You'll probably embarrass yourself. If you make one mistake, people will think less of you. You're asking for too much. You need to work harder before you deserve to feel proud. Have you ever noticed how convincing these thoughts can feel? And that's because you've probably heard some version of these thoughts hundreds or even thousands of times. And over time, repetition creates familiarity. And familiarity often feels like truth. And the important thing to understand is just because a thought is familiar does not mean that it's accurate. Your inner critic repeats the same messages over and over and over until they start to feel like facts. And that is why awareness matters so much, because you can't question a voice that you don't notice. It's just automatically running in the background. So we need to bring awareness to this voice in order to question it. So, one of the biggest shifts you'll experience in this course is learning to separate yourself from the voice in your mind. And notice that I didn't say you will get rid of it overnight. The goal is not to pretend that the critic disappears because it doesn't. It will still be there. The goal is to stop handing it the microphone. So think about sitting in a meeting with a few people around a table. Everyone has an opinion, right? One person generally tends to dominate the conversation. They interrupt others, they speak confidently, and eventually everyone else begins assuming that they are the authority simply because they're the loudest. And your inner world can operate in that exact same way. The critic has simply been the loudest voice in your inner world, but that does not mean that it's the wisest voice. And as you become more aware, you will start recognizing moments that previously happened automatically. So, for example, imagine that you make a mistake at work. An old pattern or a current pattern might look like this. You make one mistake. Your inner critic tells you, I always mess things up. I knew I wasn't good enough. You feel anxious. Because you are feeling anxious, you either withdraw or you overwork to compensate for this. And all of this can happen in less than 30 seconds. It can happen so fast that it feels as though the emotion came first before the thoughts. And in reality, there was an entire conversation happening beneath the surface. You just might not have been aware that it was happening. Okay, so now imagine the same situation after you've been practicing awareness of the inner critic voice. Here's what could happen. You make a mistake. You think, I always mess things up. You take a pause. You notice. You say, interesting, there's my inner critic again. So nothing has changed about the situation itself, but everything has changed about your relationship to the thought that your inner critic had. You are observing the thought instead of becoming the thought. And that single pause creates space, and space creates choice. Instead of automatically believing the criticism, you begin asking questions like, is this thought actually true? Is it helpful? Would I say this to someone I care about? What evidence supports this thought, and what evidence does not support this thought? And these questions obviously don't magically erase negative thinking, but they can do something really, really powerful, which is weaken the automatic belief that every thought deserves to be trusted. And this is especially important for highly sensitive people because our sensitivity often means that we experience emotions deeply. And when a critical thought appears, the emotional response can feel incredibly real, right? Because the feeling itself is real. The interpretation that created that feeling may not be real, may not be true, may not be accurate. And that is a distinction worth remembering because you are not learning to distrust yourself. You are learning to become more discerning about which thoughts deserve your attention and your focus. And as you continue through today, don't worry about changing anything yet. Just become a compassionate observer. Notice the phrases that your inner critic repeats most often. Notice when it becomes louder. Notice what situations seem to trigger it. And each observation is a victory and is a step in the right direction. Every moment of awareness is evidence that you are waking up to a pattern that has operated in the background of your brain for years, probably. And once you can see that pattern, you are no longer trapped inside it. And that is where real change begins. So, by this point, you may be wondering if this voice isn't really me, then where did it come from? Valid question. Thanks for bringing it up. That is one of the most compassionate questions that you can ask yourself. Many people assume that having a loud inner critic means that there is something wrong with them. They believe that they are just too negative or too insecure or somehow broken. But what if your inner critic wasn't created because you were broken? What if it developed because your brain was trying to protect you? That shift in perspective can change so much. As an HSP, your nervous system naturally notices more. You pick up on subtle facial expressions, changes in tone of voice, emotional undercurrents, and details that other people might completely miss. This sensitivity is a gift. It allows you to be deeply empathetic, intuitive, thoughtful, and caring. And of course, every gift has challenges. And if you are here, I'm sure it's because you are finding something challenging. That's why you are taking this course, right? So, because you notice so much, you're also more likely to notice criticism, disappointment, rejection, or conflict. These are experiences that another person might shrug off, but they can stay with us for days, weeks, or even years. And I'm sure something comes to mind when I say this, an experience that you had. Your brain does not interpret these experiences as random events. It starts looking for ways to protect you from these things happening again. So imagine a child who receives praise only when they perform perfectly. Maybe they were complimented for getting straight A's, but criticized for making mistakes. Maybe they learned that being easy, good, or helpful earned approval, while expressing difficult emotions led to rejection. Children don't consciously analyze these experiences, they adapt. Their brain quietly begins creating rules, like if I never make mistakes, then I'll be accepted. If I criticize myself first, then other people's criticism won't hurt as much. If I stay small and don't draw attention to myself, then I will be safe. And at the time, these rules may have genuinely helped you navigate your world and protected you and kept you safe. And that's why it's so important not to view your inner critic as an enemy. It may just be using strategies that no longer serve you, but it likely learned those strategies while trying to keep you emotionally safe. Think of it like an overprotective smoke alarm. A smoke alarm has one job, to warn you about danger. And if it's working properly, it can save your life. But what happens if it becomes overly sensitive? Suddenly it goes off every time you make toast. The alarm isn't trying to ruin your breakfast, it's doing exactly what it was designed to do. It's simply reacting to situations that no longer require an emergency response. And your inner critic often works the same way. It sounds the alarm before a presentation, before sending an email, before trying something new, before saying no, before asking for help, before setting a boundary, before sharing your opinion. And its message is always something similar, like, careful, something bad could happen. And the problem isn't that it wants to protect you, the problem is that it's using outdated information. Your brain is likely still responding to situations today as though you are the same person you were years ago, but you're not. You've grown, you've learned, you've survived experiences that once felt impossible, and yet your inner critic has not updated its operating manual. And that's why awareness matters so much, because you can't teach your brain a new way of responding until you recognize the old pattern. And this is also why trying to fight your inner critic often backfires. Because imagine yelling at a frightened child who is trying to protect you. Would they suddenly calm down? Probably not. They'd likely become even more anxious. And your inner critic can react in a similar way. So when you respond with more anger, like, stop thinking like this, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just be confident? You unintentionally are creating another layer of self-criticism. And instead of quieting the voice, you give it more evidence that something must be wrong. So a more helpful response begins with curiosity. So the next time you notice your inner critic speaking, try asking yourself, what is this part of me afraid might happen? And you may discover that beneath every harsh statement is a fear. So instead of you're going to fail, you may hear, I'm afraid you'll be disappointed. Instead of you're not good enough, what's underneath might be, I don't want you to get hurt. And that doesn't mean that the critic's conclusions are accurate. It just means that there's often a vulnerable need hiding underneath those harsh words. And recognizing this does not excuse self-criticism, it just helps explain it. And understanding creates compassion, and compassion creates safety, and safety is where the lasting change begins. So, as you continue through this course, I want to invite you to practice one simple shift. Instead of asking, what's wrong with me? Start asking, what has my inner critic been trying to protect me from? And that one question can transform the entire relationship you have with yourself. Because when you begin seeing your inner critic as a protector, just using outdated strategies instead of an enemy trying to destroy you, something really wonderful can happen. You stop fighting yourself. And that is the first step toward finally becoming your own safe place. Now that we've talked about recognizing your inner critic and understanding where it may have come from, we're going to look at something equally important. What happens when we believe everything that voice tells us? And for many people, the answer is simple. It becomes their reality. And your inner critic doesn't just influence how you feel about yourself, it also shapes the decisions that you make, the opportunities that you pursue, the relationships you build, and the life that you believe you are allowed to have. So think about it for a minute. How many times have you talked yourself out of doing something because a critical thought convinced you that you weren't ready? Maybe you didn't apply for the job because you assumed someone else was more qualified. Maybe you stayed quiet during a meeting because you were worried that your ideas weren't good enough. Maybe you delayed starting a project or setting a boundary or pursuing a dream because your inner voice whispered, who do you think you are? And these moments might seem small on their own, but over weeks, months, years, they begin to accumulate. Little by little, your world can become smaller, not because you lack the ability to grow, but because fear has been quietly making decisions on your behalf. And this is one of the greatest hidden costs of harsh self-talk. It doesn't just affect your confidence, it affects your choices, and your choices shape your life. Our brains have an incredible ability to repeat familiar patterns. And if you hear the same message over and over, your mind eventually stops questioning it. So imagine someone saying to themselves every morning, I'm terrible at meeting new people. At first, it's just a thought. But over time, that thought becomes an expectation. And the expectation influences your behavior. You avoid conversations. You hesitate to introduce yourself. You assume others won't be interested. And as a result, you miss opportunities to connect. And then, because of all that, the brain points to those missed opportunities as proof to tell you, see, I knew I wasn't good at this. And that is how a belief reinforces itself. Not because it was true in the beginning, because it was never true, but because believing it influenced your behavior. Your inner critic often creates these invisible cycles. The thought shapes the emotion, and the emotion influences the action, and the action appears to confirm the thought. It's like a triangle, they're all connected. Thoughts, feelings, behaviors. And understanding this cycle is empowering because it means that now you can also interrupt the cycle. Highly sensitive people often carry emotional burdens that were never theirs to begin with. You may replay conversations repeatedly, searching for evidence that you upset someone. You may assume responsibility for other people's emotions. You may believe that it's your job to prevent disappointment, conflict, or rejection at all costs. And while these habits often come from a caring heart because we care deeply, these habits also become exhausting when they are fueled by constant self-criticism. Think of it like carrying a heavy backpack every single day. At first, you notice the weight. Eventually, you adapt. And after a while, it just feels normal. And then one day, someone helps you take off the backpack. And it's only then when you realize how much energy it's been taking just to carry it. And harsh self-talk works in very much the same way. Because it's been present for so long, you might not even realize how much emotional energy it consumes because it takes energy to second guess yourself. It takes energy to replay every mistake. It takes energy to strive for impossible perfection. It takes energy to constantly prove your worth. So it's no wonder that so many people feel emotionally drained. And the goal of this course isn't to help you become someone who never experiences difficult thoughts, because that just won't happen. The goal is to help you stop carrying this unnecessary emotional weight. One fear that so many people have is that if they become kinder to themselves, then they'll become lazy or they'll stop growing. And maybe you've even thought, if I stop pushing myself, I'll lose my motivation. It's a common concern, but think of the people who have encouraged you the most throughout your life. Who helped you grow more? The person who constantly criticized you, or the person who believed in you, supported you, and reminded you that mistakes were part of learning? Most of us thrive in environments where we feel safe to learn, not where we fear being punished for every imperfection. And the same principle applies to your relationship with yourself. Self-compassion doesn't mean pretending that mistakes don't matter. It means responding to mistakes in a way that encourages growth instead of shame. Imagine spilling coffee on an important document. Your inner critic might say, you're so careless, you always ruin everything. A compassionate response might sound like, that was frustrating. Let's see what can be saved and figure out the next step. Notice something important. Neither response ignores the reality. Both acknowledge the mistake, but only one helps you move forward. And that is the voice that you're beginning to develop. Not a voice that sugarcoats things, but a voice that supports you through things. Maybe the most important idea in today's lesson is that you are the one noticing your thoughts. You are not the thoughts themselves. And the distinction is subtle, but it is life-changing. Because if you can observe your inner critic, then there is already a part of you that exists beyond it. And the observing part of you is calm, it's curious, it's compassionate. It doesn't need to argue with every critical thought because it recognizes those thoughts as mental events, not permanent truths. The more you strengthen this observing awareness, the less control your inner critic has over your emotional world. And its voice may still appear, but it no longer gets to make every decision. And that is where freedom begins. So today is not about silencing your inner critic forever. It's about realizing that you don't have to believe everything it says. And that realization may feel small right now, but it's the foundation for everything that we'll build together from this point forward. In the next lesson, we will talk more about how your inner critic may be actually trying to protect you, just using a strategy that's no longer serving you. And understanding this changes the conversation from one that is all about self-judgment to one of self-understanding, which opens the door to lasting change. So I will see you in lesson 2, where we will talk about why your brain keeps picking on you. Thank you so much for listening to Highly Sensitive Healing. You can help support the podcast by taking a minute to rate and review it, share your favorite episode with a friend, or become a subscriber on Patreon. Visit laurenlasalle.com for information about my mentorship programs, join my email list to stay up to date with how I can support you, as well as exclusive email list perks, and connect with me on Instagram at I am Lauren LaSalle. Happy healing.